Nobody wants to be Judas, but if we're honest, many have been closer to him than they'd like to admit. No, I don't hate him. He wasn't a monster. He was just tired of waiting for a Messiah who didn't do what he expected. Judas didn't betray Jesus out of malice, but out of disappointment. He expected a kingdom and saw a cross. He expected power and saw surrender. He expected revenge and saw grace. And when God doesn't meet your expectations, when faith doesn't seem to give you results, when heaven's silence disappoints you, it's easier than you think to trade the sacred for something you can actually control. Today, some do it for pride, for a relationship, for money, for an idea. But the story of Judas isn't just about betrayal. It's about a heart that didn't understand until the very end that it could still come back.
I wasn't born to betray anyone. I was born in a house where people talked about God, but they also talked about Rome, about oppression, about humiliation, about promises that still hadn't been fulfilled. My father used to tell me about the Maccabees, about how Israel once had brave men willing to do anything for freedom. He told me about the Messiah who would come to restore the throne, to bring justice, to cleanse the temple. I grew up waiting for that. I didn't want riches. I wanted to see Israel free. That's why I didn't go looking for work at the temple, nor did I become a Pharisee, like some friends. I was looking for something different. And then one day I heard people talk about him. They said he healed, that he spoke with authority, that the people followed him as if he were a king without a crown, that he said things like, "The kingdom of heaven is near." And that was enough for me. I didn't follow him out of curiosity. I followed him because I believed, because I thought, this is the moment we've been waiting for. I approached. I wasn't one of the first, but over time I earned a place among the 12. And yes, I was the one who carried the money bag. Not because I liked money at first, of course, but because I believed in what he would do and I wanted to be ready to organize it.
The name Judas didn't always carry the weight it does today. Judas comes from the Hebrew Yehuda, which means praised or may God be praised. It was an honorable, respected name. It carried the echo of Judah, the son of Jacob, and of the leader of the Maccabean revolt, Judas Maccabeus. Judas was not synonymous with traitor. It was a synonym for bravery and messianic hope. But this Judas was not just anyone. They called him Iscariot. There are different theories about this title. The most widely accepted is that it came from a place called Iscariot, a man from Kerioth, a town in the south of Judea, that made Judas the only southern disciple. The rest came from the north, from Galilee. And even though the text doesn't say it explicitly, that already made him different. Another, more radical but less likely theory links him to the Sicarii, the radical anti-Roman rebels. But whatever the origin of Iscariot, it marked him. It marked him as different, as intense, as someone with another story, another accent, and maybe other expectations.
I wasn't sought out. I wasn't called like Peter or John, who were fishing when he passed by. I went looking for him. I approached him one day, when he was finishing teaching, when people were starting to disperse, and I said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Luke 9:57. He looked at me, not like an eager recruiter, but like someone who knew more about me than I wanted to admit. And he answered with something I didn't fully understand at the time. foxes have dens and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Luke 9:57-58. He didn't promise me riches, he didn't promise me comfort, but even so, I followed him. Over time, when the group started moving from village to village, someone had to take care of the money, the expenses, the supplies, the help for the poor, and they entrusted the money bag to me. John mentions it many years later. He had the money bag and used to take from what was put into it. John 12:6. I won't say it was like that from the beginning. At first, I felt honored. Taking care of the money bag was more than just counting coins. It was being part of the plan. I thought that when he took the throne, I would be there, organizing, structuring, building something great. But soon, something in me began to change. I realized that they didn't think like I did. Peter was impulsive. John, a dreamer. Andrew, too simple. I thought in terms of power, of strategy, of possibilities. I started to see them as naive, as good men, but without vision. And sometimes, even though it hurt to think it, I wondered, could it be that Jesus is like them too? There were moments when it seemed like he didn't want to win, that he didn't care about being king, that he talked about suffering, about dying. That wasn't what I had signed up for. I wanted to see the kingdom rise, not witness its fall.
Judas's betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was slow, silent. It took shape amid disappointments and decisions. John, the one closest to Jesus, remembers it clearly. It happened in a house when a woman broke a jar of perfume and poured it over the teacher's feet. It was an intimate moment, scandalous, beautiful. And that's when Judas spoke. Why wasn't this perfume sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor? John 12:5. But John, years later, wrote the truth behind those words. But he said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And since he had the money bag, he would take from what was put into it. John 12:6. Judas didn't understand that act of giving. He didn't understand the extravagance of love. For him, everything had to have a purpose, control, a strategy. And that was pulling him away from his teacher's heart. And then came the Last Supper. Jesus didn't expose him, didn't shame him. He only said, with the weight of someone who loves deeply, these words, "The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Matthew 26:24. It was a warning, not a condemnation. Jesus didn't shut the door on Judas. It was Judas himself who closed it from the inside.
I was there when he prayed, when he raised his voice to heaven and spoke with his Father the way a son speaks to someone he loves. I heard him say, "While I was with them, I kept them in your name, the name you gave me, and I protected them. And not one of them was lost, except the son of perdition, so that the scripture would be fulfilled." John 17:12. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. I knew he was talking about me. And the worst part is, it wasn't a surprise. Jesus had seen me from the very beginning. I remember it on an ordinary day, when he had just chosen the 12, when everything still seemed possible. He said, almost in a whisper, as he looked at us, "Didn't I choose you, the 12? And yet one of you is a devil." John 6:70. And I knew. Not because he pointed at me, not because he accused me, but because the devil had already started whispering to me that I could improve his plan. I didn't hate him, I just wanted to force the moment. I thought, if I push him, if I force him to act, he'll have to rise up, fight, take the throne. I didn't want his blood, I wanted his victory, but on my terms. That night, when Jesus announced that one of us would betray him, everything inside me broke.
That festive night, night of unleavened bread, night of ancient memories, of liberation. And in the middle of that celebration, Jesus interrupted the supper, not to make a toast, not to teach, but to reveal a pain. Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. Matthew 26, verse 21. The room froze. Hands stopped moving, and one by one, with trembling voices, they began to ask, "Is it me, Lord?" No one suspected Judas. John remembers that when Jesus spoke to him, some thought that since Judas had the money bag, maybe Jesus had asked him to go buy something for the feast or to give something to the poor. According to John, chapter 13, verse 29, No one saw that the traitor was already sitting at the table, that the plan was already in motion, that the betrayal had already begun in the heart before it did in the hands.
When he looked at me at the table, I knew that he knew. He didn't shout, he didn't expose me. He just broke the bread, dipped it, and gave it to me. What you are going to do it quickly. John 13:27. And then I stood up. No one stopped me. Not a single hand got in the way. I went out into the cold night. The air smelled of Passover, but inside me, there was no celebration left. I walked to where the chief priests were. The Sanhedrin was not asleep. They were waiting for me. I went in. My voice did not tremble. What will you give me if I hand him over to you? Matthew 26:15. They looked at me like someone appraising merchandise. 30 pieces of silver. 30. The price of a slave. No more, no less. I accepted. Not because I wanted his blood, but because I thought I would force his moment, that he would do something, that he would rebel, that he would fight, that he wouldn't let himself be arrested. But he didn't. I led them to the garden, to Gethsemane, where I knew he used to pray with them. When I saw him, my heart was beating so hard I thought the soldiers would hear it. I approached. He didn't step back. He didn't avoid me. He just looked at me as if he still believed I might not go through with it. I wanted to say something to him, to explain, to stop myself, but the soldiers were there. The priests, the torches. Everything was already in motion, so I went up to him, took his face in my hands, and kissed him. "Hail, Master!" And he looked at me, not with hatred, but with a sadness so deep that even now it breaks me inside. With a kiss, "Do you betray the Son of Man?" Luke 22:48. I didn't scream, I didn't cry there. But when his eyes filled with tears, I knew I had made a mistake. Not because of the betrayal, but for not believing I could still come back.
Many say it was the Romans who killed Jesus. And in part, that's true. They drove in the nails, they raised the cross, they carried out the sentence. But the cross didn't begin in Rome. The cross was plotted in Jerusalem. It wasn't soldiers who looked for false witnesses. It wasn't soldiers who paid for a quiet arrest. It wasn't soldiers who set up a trial at night, violating the very Jewish law they claimed to defend. It was the religious leaders, those who feared losing their power, those who couldn't stand a Messiah who threatened their invisible thrones. Break time equals 0.5s/Judas was only the spark that ignited a conspiracy that had long been burning in the hearts of men.
When I saw him bound, When I saw him in silence, something inside me broke. He didn't defend himself. He didn't shout. He didn't even resist. I thought he would fight, that he would perform a miracle, that he would show his power. But I saw him stay quiet. I saw him surrender. And then I knew what I had done. I ran to the temple, the coins in my hands. They weighed like chains. I approached the chief priests and threw the coins onto the floor. I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. Matthew 27:4. They looked at me with the indifference of those who have already gotten what they wanted. What do we care? That's your problem. They left me alone, alone with my guilt, alone with the echo of my betrayal. I never went back to the disciples. I never went back to seek his forgiveness. I went looking for the quickest way to silence the voice that was screaming inside me. And so, in an abandoned field, I took my own life. Not out of hatred, but because I no longer knew how to return.
Judas will be remembered in every generation, not only as a traitor, but as the man who was so close to grace, yet chose remorse over forgiveness. Jesus called him friend until the very end, but Judas didn't believe he could still be restored. That was his condemnation. Not his mistake, not his betrayal, but his disbelief in mercy. Scripture calls him the son of perdition in John 17 verse 12, and his story was recorded as a warning. It is not the mistake that destroys a man, but refusing to return. Maybe you heard this story and thought, that would never happen to me. But if we're honest, we've all been a little like Judas at some point. We've expected God to do what we want. We've tried to control his plans. We've traded his love for coins that aren't worth it. We've chosen to stay silent when we should have run back into his arms. We've all failed. We've all fallen. But the real tragedy of Judas wasn't his mistake. It was not believing he could still come back. Peter failed too. Peter also denied Jesus. But Peter wept and returned. Judas wept, but stayed alone. Judas heard the echo of his guilt, but he didn't hear the voice that still called him friend. You don't have to stay where you fell. You don't have to carry the guilt. You don't have to believe it's already too late. Today, if you feel like you've failed, that you've betrayed, that you've lost your way, that it's not worth it, I want to tell you there's a way back. And that way doesn't start with explanations. It starts with a simple decision to return. Yes, to return.